For anybody that's new to adaptive email DLP, maybe you just signed on, maybe you've just deployed or are getting ready to deploy, I wanted to just real quick highlight what we're really focusing on with adaptive email DLP. So we're really focused on solving human-centric email data loss. And it really falls into these three different buckets. Misdirected emails, which we've all sent before, it's accidental. It's typically not a malicious situation. It's usually just an autocomplete error. Someone's in a hurry. Misattached file, same thing. Inadvertent sharing of files, maybe a worksheet that's hidden in a spreadsheet. But also on the right, I think a lot of us have seen the email exfiltration situation that's happening within a lot of organizations. We're finding them in the data loss assessments that we do on a daily basis. And this is where we can see more of an intentional basis on these. Not always malicious, but intentional, because someone's choosing to send work to their personal account. And that falls in a lot of different buckets you can see there. The thing we're finding today is this agentic AI risk amplification of all three of these, right? So we're seeing the amplification of sensitive data being pulled together, or maybe someone using an agent to create and send an email. So we're really starting to see this, all three of these amplify because of this agent, the year of the AI right now. So that's really what we're solving for. And I want to also talk about this because Scarlett's going to talk about some really cool features on the solution to this problem. So adaptive email DLP really looks at the behavioral side of email data loss. And it's not meant to replace rules-based email DLP. It's really meant to augment it and to work together. We talk about this hybrid approach at Proofpoint to email data security. And if you haven't heard this yet, or if you haven't worked on this so far, it really is focusing on the behavioral side versus the rules-based side. So if you think about it, rules have to be written. You have to know what you're writing for. Adaptive email DLP really focuses on those evolving unknown risks that you can't write rules for. So together, they make that perfect hybrid or modernized approach to email DLP. Also, if you're new to adaptive email DLP, just a high level kind of focus on how it works. Really what it does within 12 to 24 hours is it scans historical data for every employee. And what it will do in those 24 hours is it's going to create a mapping of normal communication patterns, who everyone talks to, what they talk about with those different users or teams of users, and what those normal communication patterns and behaviors are. And from there, it will create a benchmark of what those behaviors are for each user. Once it has a benchmark for each user, it's going to basically look for any anomalies to that benchmark, saying, maybe Angela doesn't typically talk to Scarlett about this specific topic. So basically within 12 to 24 hours, it's going to start looking for those anomalies and start detecting and preventing any sort of behavioral or human-centric data loss. And with that, here is Scarlett with some wonderful best practices she's going to walk through. She's going to actually do demos using the portal. Scarlett, take it away.
Thank you, Angela. So we obviously talk a lot about best practice, but what does that actually mean here? So, we're not necessarily talking about a theory or a fixed template. We're talking about what we've seen actually work, and we see it consistently across different organizations. So that's very much shaped by industry standards, but also by real, customer outcomes and our experience of what good looks like in practice. So from there, it's about tailoring that to your environment specifically. So very much a case of best practice not being a one size fits all. It's ultimately an informed guidance. It's shaped by evidence and experience, and then it's tailored to you. So these are really the areas that we're going to be focusing on today. We'll dive into the portal shortly, but for reference, we have misdelivery protection. So that's often a module that you ultimately set and forget. It runs in the background, and the more end users engage with the warnings, like Angela said, the more we'll be able to learn, we'll be able to pick up on any kind of new patterns and trends. It also offers some custom protection options, which I don't see heavily across our customer base, but I can see the impact that it will have by such small changes. And then alongside that module, we have the exfiltration protection. So we know that exfiltrating data isn't always malicious. I suspect if we ask this group whether they've ever sent home a payslip or a CV, we would see a sea of virtual hands raised. But that said, it really is an area that can cause a lot of harm if it isn't managed appropriately. So we suggest starting with these 3 key policies, which offer different levels of visibility, outcomes, and prevention. But with that said, I'm going to dive into the portal. So great, we've really set the scene then of, what is best practice, but what do these actually look like from a configuration perspective? So let's dive in. I'm going to go into the adaptive email DLP section here and then into configuration. And then I'm going to start with email misdelivery protection, or if you've been here for a while, you'll know it probably more as Guardian. So this is a policy that is often created as a bit of a template. There's a couple of things just really to bear in mind here. So ultimately, quite self-explanatory, but let's walk through every section just to make sure that we're aligned. Very much want to get to a point where we are warning the end user. So that could be through a pop-up, it could be a bounce back message, but ultimately we're letting the user know if there could be a potential mistake here. And often we'll be able to suggest if there could be a better recipient for this email. Very much want that applied to all emails. We don't want to create any kind of gaps between the different deployment methods that we have. And we very much do want that applied to everyone. Now, there might be some nuances here where we do have separate policies, but typically we'll start with a policy that is scoped to everyone. And from there, we'll be able to go back to that tailoring point of duplicate policies or policies that might need to be scoped to different teams. Expanding on that, we have these custom options here. So typically the warning rate is set to the recommended level. So that's really the optimum level that allows us to do what we need to do without creating any kind of unnecessary noise levels for the end user. Now, I mentioned before, obviously there could be cases where we do scope this to different groups. For example, if there are certain individuals that may require a higher or lower level of protection, that could be, for example, if they're in a sales team, for example, and they're sending to people that they've only recently contacted for the first time, they may require a reduced warning rate here. But likewise, it could go the other way where certain teams might require that increased protection just due to the sheer volume of emails that are being sent. And emailing on autopilot is a real thing. Some of the custom options that are at the end of this report, I think, can go unnoticed quite easily, but they are very quick changes that do actually have a great impact. So to just run through what those two are, you've got the first time recipient field here. So ultimately being able to warn if it is the first time that they are contacting this individual. We then also have the CC field anomaly. So for example, they're sending an email with a high volume of contacts in the CC field. We could look at suggesting perhaps they consider the BCC field. So with that said, this is ultimately where we'd expect to be from a best practice perspective for misdelivery specifically. So all of these features switched on, recommended warning rate, and a policy that is scoped to everyone. And I'm going to shift over to exfiltration. Now, typically when we talk about exfiltration, very much you can scope one policy that could be set quite broadly, and it may look at every single thing that is going to unauthorized recipients. Where we suggest and where we see the most success is actually layering that protection. So I've got 3 separate policies here. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every single one in detail, but there are some commonalities that I do just want to call out. So for example, I'm going to start with this middle policy because it has the most to share. And from there, I'll share exactly where they might differentiate. So again, a very similar approach where we'll scope that to everyone. The difference here being, for example, if you have a leavers group, we may want to scope the group specifically. Often find that leavers are notorious for exfiltrating data. Perhaps these are things that we do want to keep a closer eye on. So that's where we could look at having a second policy in place that is scoped specifically to that group of individuals. When it comes to the conditions, typically we'll start with the exfiltration condition. So that works really well when we want to cast the net really wide and we want to look at everything that is going to what we deem to be unauthorized recipients. Now, where we perhaps want to maybe find a good balance is, like I said in my original point, of sending home payslips and sending home CVs. As an organization, you may not be as concerned with those kind of events. Now, we typically don't want to bombard the end user with a bunch of different warnings. We really want to hone in on those ones that do require the warning and do just require them to think, is this something I really should be sending? Probably not. So that's that first policy that I mentioned. Typically, this is a policy that could be set to silently track. So that means we cast our net wide, we collect all of that information for visibility, but we don't necessarily do anything from an end user perspective. So yourselves as portal admins, you get all of that good data. And again, that helps to really feed into that machine learning component. Where we maybe want to set ourselves slightly to the side for this second and third policy are these additional conditions here. So this is typically focusing on sensitive data. So when we talk about exfiltrating data, typically that is going to contain sensitive information that we definitely don't want leaving the organization. Now, there's a couple of ways that we can do that. So we find that pairing it with one, the exfiltration condition, but then looking at how many attachments have been included, what type of attachments, does it contain sensitive information? It just really allows us to refine and hone in on those events, like I say, that we do definitely want to be warning on and preventing them from being sent. So these are all of the different conditions, and you'll notice that we've paired it with the or condition here. So it can be any one of these paired with that exfiltration machine learning condition. Where we can maybe go one step further here is the action types that we have available to us. So like I said, that first policy we can keep in silently track. This second and third policy that we have, we'll probably try and find the fine line between warning. We might even want to go to the block phase. Again, it's going to depend on the organization, and that's where we can really start tailoring. But for this example here, I'm going to keep it in warn. But where I'm going to maybe add some more information is in this custom warning title and message. So the custom warning title and message will appear on that pop-up. This works really well if, for example, there's an internal policy that we want to reference, maybe just some general guidance or just generally language that really lands with the end user, which is going to get their attention. And like I say, get them to think, is this something that I should be sending? So this can be customized as you see fit, but like I say, those links work really well with getting the end user to think twice. We now also have the ability to add in custom headers. So let's think about, this isn't the only tool that you may have in place. You may want to start triggering downstream tooling, which could then require further action. So some of the main use cases that we see for the custom header piece, there's a few different ones in play. So just to name the most common ones that we see, you may want to start triggering a manager approval flow. So you could have a transport rule that reads the header and then routes to Power Automate for approval flow. You may even want to start triggering purview policies. So you could signal to purview to apply sensitivity labels, for example. You might even want to consider triggering CRM automation. So again, dependent on the CRM connector that could read the mail, but thinking, tools like Salesforce, for example. Or the most common one that we do here since joining Proofpoint, of course, is if you do have Proofpoint secure email gateway in place, you ultimately don't want to create a situation where maybe you are double flagging. So you could either look at avoiding that, or you could even go the other way and combine it with email DLP. So back to Angela's point of really being able to augment those tools together and get them working really well. So that ultimately enables us to skip the scanning if the header indicates that AEDLP has already checked the email, or it could look at triggering a deeper content scan to check additional libraries, for example. And then lastly, we have notifications. So we have compliance alerts. Now, I wouldn't suggest having a compliance alert on every single policy that we have here, because of course that inbox is probably going to get inundated with a lot of emails. But where this could work really well is the leavers policy that I mentioned. So if I had £1 for every time that I speak with a customer that says, yes, somebody's left the organization and they exfiltrated a lot of data that AEDLP did see, but as part of our workflow processes, we didn't see it until a couple of days after they'd actually left. Could this have potentially have helped reduce that gap? Possibly. So where we suggest including this is in that leavers policy so that you are notified as soon as that happens in the moment. And it just means that you can actually take action then versus that person leaving the business. And it maybe just been a little bit more difficult to manage. So hindsight's a brilliant thing, but I think this definitely helps with reducing those frustrating moments that I'm sure everyone has experienced one way or another. So all in all, that's very much how I suggest layering. You've got the 3 different policies. One thing I will mention, because you're probably thinking, gosh, have I got to do this all by hand? Have I got to do this manually? No, the good news is that all of the policies that I've got here, 1, 2, and 3, already exist in the library. So we already have templates exactly as I've laid out that you could look at implementing. If you'd like to test them out first, no problem at all. We could maybe set them up to silently track, and that's where we could maybe move into that warn state if it makes sense to. But all of the policies that I've described do live here. Now, whilst I do mention the libraries, and obviously we are talking about DLP in general, these 2 modules aren't the only functionalities behind the tool. So we do also look at other DLP use cases. But whenever I say that to a customer, they think, I don't know until something goes wrong. So these libraries could serve as a way of thinking, what other ways could I get value from this tool? So I'd always suggest that if there is a specific use case that you did have in mind, let's discuss it. So you can contact your account manager, we can schedule a call, and we can just run through what's actually possible and if it is something that AEDLP could help you with.